The morning shift on Nexus 7 started like any other day. Workers from 12 different species moved through the mining tunnels, their voices creating a familiar buzz of conversation in dozens of languages. The colony had been their home for 3 years now, a peaceful place where humans, Kelvari, Thaxians, and others worked side by side extracting precious quantum crystals from the planet's core. Captain, Yuna. Kim was reviewing supply manifests in her office when the ground shook. At first, she thought it was another controlled blast from the deep mines. But the tremor was different, chaotic, violent, like something massive had struck the outer sector. Her comm unit crackled to life. "Captain, we have a problem," came the voice of Lieutenant Junho Nam from the perimeter station. "Unknown vessel just crashed in Sector 7. It's big and it's burning." Yuna grabbed her field jacket and rushed outside. In the distance, black smoke rose from what remained of the cargo freighter's stellar horizon. The ship had carved a deep scar across the landscape before coming to rest against a rocky outcrop. Debris scattered for hundreds of meters, an emergency. Sirens wailed across the colony. "Get rescue teams out there," Yuna ordered as she climbed into her transport and scanned for survivors. But as they approached the crash site, something felt wrong. The ship's hull bore strange markings, not standard commercial freight indicators, but something else. Warning symbols in a language she didn't recognize. The Kelvari guards, who had arrived first, were backing away from the wreckage, their usually fearless demeanor replaced by something Yuna had never seen before. These were warriors who had fought in the sector wars, beings who feared nothing, yet they were retreating. "What's the situation?" Yuna called out to guard Captain Zethkar. The alien's forearms trembled as he pointed toward the ship's cargo. "Bay. Something is wrong. The containment unit. It's breached." That's when Yuna saw it. A massive metal container, easily the size of a small building, lay split open like a cracked egg. Strange fluid leaked from its interior, and the metal edges looked like they had been torn apart from the inside. A sound echoed from within the wreckage low. Rumbling, predatory. It made Yuna's spine tingle with instinctive fear. Every human instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to move closer. The Vorthok Warbeast emerged from the shadows like a nightmare made real. Standing 12 feet tall, its midnight black hide rippled with enhanced muscle fibers that pulsed with unnatural energy. Crimson eyes blazed with artificial rage, and neural implants along its skull flashed with electric blue light. This was no natural creature. It had been modified, enhanced, turned into something far more dangerous than nature ever intended. The beast's head swiveled toward them, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged wasn't just a roar. It was a psychic scream that hit every conscious mind within a kilometer. Workers collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads. Even the normally stoic Thaxian engineers began to panic. "All units, fall back." Commander Temin Park's voice cracked over the comm as he witnessed the creature tear through a reinforced security barrier like it was made of paper. "Fall back now," but retreat was easier said than done. The Warbeast moved with terrifying speed, its massive form flowing like liquid death across the mining platform. Its claws, one as long as a human forearm, left deep gouges in the reinforced metal flooring. Every step shook the ground. The colony's automated defenses activated, energy turrets swiveling to target the threat. Bright beams of concentrated plasma struck the creature's hide, but the enhanced skin absorbed the blasts like they were nothing more than flashlights. The beast had been built to withstand military-grade weapons. Security forces opened fire with everything they had. Pulse rifles, ion cannons, even the heavy mining lasers were redirected toward the threat. The air filled with the crackling of energy weapons and the acrid smell of burned ozone. But nothing stopped the creature's advance. Dr. Minho Choi, colony's chief researcher, watched in horror from the command center as the beast systematically destroyed everything in its path. Mining equipment that had taken months to install was reduced to scrap metal in seconds. Storage buildings collapsed under the creature's assault. "This is Nexus 7 calling any vessel in range." Minho spoke rapidly into his emergency beacon. "We have a Class X hostile loose in the colony. Repeat, Class X hostile. We need immediate military support and full evacuation."
Got the response from
Galactic command was swift but devastating. Nexus 7, nearest military vessel, is 8 hours away. You are on your own. 8 hours. Minho looked at the screens showing the beast's rampage. At this rate, there wouldn't be a colony left in 1 hour, let alone 8. The Warbeast paused in the center of the main plaza, its massive head raised as it released another psychic roar. This time, the sound carried a different message, not just aggression, but territorial dominance. It was claiming Nexus 7 as its hunting ground. Workers fled in panic toward the evacuation shuttles, but many were too paralyzed by fear to move. The creature's psychic presence was overwhelming, turning brave miners into trembling children. Only the humans seemed able to function somewhat normally, their minds naturally more resistant to alien mental influences. As the beast began stalking toward the residential sector where families with children were huddled in their homes, one thing became clear: they were facing something that had been designed for one purpose only: killing everything in its path. The terror of Nexus 7 had been unleashed, and nothing in the galaxy seemed capable of stopping it. The evacuation shuttle, Safe Harbor, bucked like a wild horse as another explosion rocked the colony below. Pilot Ji-Wan Lee gripped the controls with white knuckles, sweat beading on her forehead as warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. "Come on, hold together," she muttered, pushing the shuttle's engines beyond their safety limits. Behind her, 37 colonists pressed against the viewports, watching their home disappear in flames and chaos. Dr. Hunkong wrapped his arms around his 7-year-old daughter, Somi, trying to shield her from the worst of the turbulence. Through the window, they could see the Warbeast moving through the colony like a force of nature, its massive form leaving destruction in its wake. "Dad, look at how it moves," Somi said quietly, her voice cutting through the panicked whispers of the other passengers. "It's not random." He followed his daughter's gaze. She was right, the creature wasn't just destroying everything. It was hunting, searching, following some kind of pattern that only it understood. Suddenly, the shuttle lurched hard to starboard.
"Out."
"Engine 3 is failing," Guan called out as sparks flew from the control panel. "I'm losing power to the stabilizers." The ship began to spin, artificial gravity failing as they tumbled through the atmosphere. Passengers screamed as they were thrown against the walls. "Emergency!" Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, and the lights flickered between normal and emergency red. "Brace for impact," Chuan shouted, wrestling with the controls as the agricultural sector rushed up to meet them. She managed to level the shuttle at the last second, but they were coming in too fast, too steep. The safe harbor hit the ground like a meteor, bouncing twice before sliding through a field of genetically modified grain. The hull scraped against rocks and debris, sending up showers of sparks. Finally, mercifully, they came to rest against an irrigation station. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the groan of stressed metal. Then the emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Everyone alive. Guan's voice was strained. She tried to move but gasped in pain. "My leg. It's trapped." Haiyan shook his head to clear it, then looked down at Somi. His daughter had a small cut on her forehead, but was otherwise unharmed. More importantly, she was already moving, unbuckling her restraints with the kind of calm focus that amazed him. "Dad!" "We need to help the others," she said, crawling toward an elderly Thaxian who was unconscious in his seat. The shuttle had broken apart in the middle, leaving them in 2 separate sections. Smoke filled the air, and small electrical fires sparked throughout the wreckage. They had minutes before the whole thing might explode. "Everyone out. Move," Guan commanded from the cockpit. But her leg was pinned under a section of twisted metal that had buckled during the crash. Somi was already at work. Her small hands moved carefully as she checked the Thaxian's pulse, just like she'd been taught back on Earth when helping her father with injured research animals. The alien was breathing, but dazed. "Mr. Veltar, can you hear me?" she asked gently. The Thaxian's large eyes opened slowly, focusing on the small human child. "Little one, are you hurt?" He whispered in accented standard. "I'm okay, but we need to get out. Can you walk?" "Out." "While other passengers?" Sad in shock or panic, Somi moved from person to person, helping where she could. Unlike the adults, she wasn't frozen by the disaster, she was problem-solving. The way she always did when one of their animals back home got hurt. Her father watched in amazement as his daughter helped a Kelvari engineer with a dislocated shoulder, then guided a human family toward the emergency exit. She had inherited his calm under pressure, but where it came from in someone so young, couldn't understand. Together, they managed to get most of the survivors out of the wreckage. Jiwan was the last to be freed, Hyun and two other men working together to lift the debris trapping her leg. She couldn't walk, but she was alive. They found shelter in an abandoned agricultural complex, about half a kilometer from the crash site. The greenhouse was part of the colony's old hydroponics facility, long since replaced by more efficient growing towers. Its transparent aluminum walls were dirty but intact, and it offered protection from the elements. As they settled in, tending to the wounded and trying to contact rescue services, the distant sound reached them, the Warbeast's roar, closer now than before. Through the dirty walls of the greenhouse, they could see it in the distance. Moving through the outer buildings of the colony, the other survivors huddled together, their faces pale with terror. The creature's psychic presence washed over them in waves, making their hands shake and their hearts race with primal fear.
Oh.
Some began to weep quietly. Others just stared at nothing, overwhelmed by the mental assault. But Somi stood at the greenhouse. While watching, while the adults cowered, she studied the massive creature with the curiosity of a child who had grown up around Earth's most dangerous predators. "Look at its shoulders," she said quietly to her father. "See how they're hunched? And its tailets not relaxed." Heian forced himself to look, fighting against every instinct that told him to hide. The beast was perhaps a kilometer away, but even at that distance, its presence was overwhelming. "What do you see?" he asked his daughter. "It's not happy," Somi replied. "It's scared too. Look how it keeps checking behind itself and the way it sniffs the air. It's what Rex used to do when thunderstorms were coming." Rex had been their German shepherd back on Earth, a rescue dog that had taken months to trust humans after being abandoned. Hyun remembered how the dog would pace and whine during storms, looking for a safe place to hide. "Somi, that's not a dog. It's the most dangerous creature in known space." But his daughter shook her head. "Maybe, but it's still scared. And scared animals do scary things because they don't know what else to do." As if to prove her point, the Warbeast suddenly stopped its advance and let out another roar. But this one was different. Instead of pure aggression, there was something else in the sound. Something that sounded almost like ... confusion. The creature began pacing back and forth, its massive head swiveling as if looking for something it couldn't find. For just a moment, Heian saw what his daughter saw, not a monster, but a lost. A frightened animal that had been turned into something it was never meant to be. Then the beast's glowing eyes turned toward their hiding place, and Heian's blood turned to ice. It had found them. The greenhouse walls trembled as something massive moved outside in the gathering darkness. Through the dirty, transparent panels, shadows shifted and danced. But none of the survivors dared to look directly at what was causing them. Massive claws scraped against the reinforced walls, with a sound like fingernails on metal. Each scratch sent vibrations through the entire structure, making the glass panels rattle in their frames. The sound was deliberate, methodical. The creature was testing their shelter, looking for weak points. "Nobody move," whispered Injured. Colonist Daeonyu, his voice barely audible. Blood from a head wound had dried on his face, making him look like he'd been through a war zone. "Don't even breathe too loud." The other survivors pressed themselves against the far wall, trying to become invisible. A Kelvari engineer covered her younglings with her forearms, while an elderly human couple held each other tightly. Understood the same terrible truth that they were being hunted, but Somi couldn't help herself. While the adults tried to hide, she found herself drawn to the wall where the creature was prowling. Her father's hand gripped her shoulder, trying to keep her back, but she gently pulled free and approached the glass. The Warbeast stopped its pacing the moment she moved. Through the reinforced panel, she could see its massive form clearly. For the first time, it stood 12 feet tall, its black hide scarred with old wounds and surgical marks. The neural implants along its skull pulsed with blue light. It's like a twisted crown of technology. But what caught Sami's attention weren't the obvious things, the claws, the teeth, the raw power. It was the little details that others missed. The way its ears kept flicking back and forth, how its massive shoulders were hunched defensively, the rapid, shallow breathing that spoke of stress rather than excitement. She pressed her small hand against the glass, the beast's burning red. Eyes locked onto hers. The greenhouse fell silent except for the sound of terrified breathing. But instead of the savage attack everyone expected, something strange happened. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying the small human child who dared to look at it without fear. "What is she doing?" someone whispered in panic. Somi ignored them, focusing entirely on the creature before her. She'd grown up on her father's research station, surrounded by animals from across the galaxy. Some had been gentle, others dangerous, but all of them had one thing in common: they communicated. Through body language, long before they used teeth or claws, the Warbeast's hackles were raised, making it look even more massive and threatening. But its ears kept twitching, moving in patterns that reminded her of confused animals back home. Its tail moved in sharp, agitated motions, not the confident sweep of a predator, but the anxious flicking of something that didn't understand its situation. "Dad," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the creature. "Look at how it keeps turning its head. It's listening for something." Dr. Hankong forced himself to observe rather than simply fear. His daughter was right. The beast wasn't just hunting, it was searching, its enhanced senses constantly scanning the environment as if looking for something specific. "The neural implants," he breathed, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're not just making it aggressive. They're overriding its natural instincts." The creature suddenly let out a sound that wasn't quite a roar, it was more like a whine. Deep and resonant but filled with confusion. The sound hit everyone's minds like a physical blow. But beneath the psychic noise, Somi heard something else: pain, loneliness, the desperate cry of something that had been lost for far too long. "It doesn't know where it belongs," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent greenhouse. She'd seen this before. Back on Earth, rescue animals that had been abused or abandoned often showed the same desperate aggression. They lashed out not because they were evil, but because they were terrified and didn't know how to ask for help. The Warbeast began pacing again. But now Somi could see the pattern. It would move a few steps, then stop and look around as if expecting to see something familiar. When it didn't find what it was looking for, it would grow more agitated. "It's looking for its pack," she realized, "or its home. Something that feels safe." The creature suddenly roared in frustration, and this time the sound was accompanied by action. Its massive claws raked across the greenhouse wall, and the reinforced glass cracked like a spider web. Debris rained down as part of the structure collapsed. "Get back," Yoon shouted, pulling at his daughter's arm. But instead of retreating, Somi did something that made everyone's blood run cold. She stepped forward, moving through the gap in the broken wall until she was standing outside the greenhouse, completely exposed. The Warbeast loomed over her icily, 3 times her height. Its claws were raised, ready to strike down the small human who had dared to leave her shelter. The neural implants along its skull pulsed faster, feeding it commands to attack, to kill, to destroy. But something in Sami's calm demeanor made it hesitate. She stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, looking up at the creature without flinching. There was no fear in her posture, no aggressive challenge. Yes. She simply stood there, the way she might approach a frightened horse or an injured bird. "Easy," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. I know you don't understand what's happening to you. The beast's head cocked to one side, its burning eyes studying this strange little creature who refused to run. The neural implants screamed at it to attack, but something deeper, some buried instinct, recognized the calm confidence in her voice for a moment that stretched like eternity. Predator and child stood facing each other in the ruins of Nexus 7. Around them, the colony burned and sirens wailed, but in that small space between them, there was only understanding. The Warbeast lowered its claws slightly, still ready to strike but no longer certain it should. Its massive chest heaved with each breath, and the blue lights along its skull flickered as two sets of programming warred within its enhanced mind. Behind the greenhouse wall, the other survivors watched in terrified amazement as a girl began to do what entire military forces had failed to accomplish. She was communicating with the most dangerous predator in known space, and somehow, possibly, it was listening. The artificial lights from the burning colony cast long shadows. Across the agricultural sector, in that eerie glow, the Warbeast's claws gleamed like polished metal as it raised them. High above the small human child who stood beneath its towering form, every muscle in the creature's enhanced body tensed for the killing strike. The neural implants along its skull pulsed rapidly, flooding its system with combat stimulants and aggressive commands. Its programming was simple and brutal: destroy all threats. Show no mercy, kill without hesitation. Behind the broken greenhouse wall, the survivors held their breath. Dr. Hankong pressed his face against the cracked glass, his heart breaking as he watched his daughter face certain death. He wanted to scream, to run to her, but he knew any sudden movement would trigger the beast's attack instincts. "Somi, please," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. But his daughter didn't run. She didn't scream or beg or try to fight. Instead, she did something that no one expected. She looked directly into the Warbeast's burning red eyes and spoke with quiet, absolute authority. "Sit." The single word cut through the night air like a blade, sharp and clear and completely without fear. It hit the creature's enhanced hearing with perfect clarity, bypassing all the technological noise in its head and striking something much deeper. For a moment that felt like forever, the most feared predator in the galaxy wavered. Its claws remained raised, its muscles coiled for attack, but something had changed. The neural implants continued their electronic screaming, demanding violence, but they were fighting against something older, something that had been buried. Under layers of genetic modification and chemical enhancement, ancient instincts stirred in the creature's altered mind. Somewhere beneath all the artificial rage and programmed aggression, a memory flickered, not its own memory, but something encoded in its very DNA. The memory of pack structure, of hierarchy, of recognizing a true leader when one appeared. Child below showed no fear, no submission, no challenge. She simply stood there with the calm confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. Her posture, her voice, her unwavering gaze, everything about her spoke of natural authority. The Warbeast's massive form began to tremble. Its enhanced neural pathways fired chaotically as two different sets of programming warred within its skull. The artificial system screamed for blood. But something deeper recognized what it was, seeing a Pec Alpha, small but absolutely certain of her place in the hierarchy. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the creature's claws lowered. Its burning eyes never left Sami's face as its massive legs folded beneath it. With a sound like distant thunder, the 12-foot terror of Nexus 7 settled onto its haunches, sitting as commanded. The silence that followed was absolute. Across the colony, emergency broadcasts stopped mid-sentence. Rescue workers paused in their evacuation efforts. Even the distant rumble of approaching military ships seemed muted as the impossible became. Reality: a human child had commanded the galaxy's most dangerous predator into submission with a single word. In the colony's command center, Commander Taman Park stared at his screens in disbelief. His tactical displays showed the creature's biosigns stabilizing, its aggression levels dropping for the first time since the containment breach. "Control to all units," he said slowly into his com, his voice barely above a whisper. "Confirm status." Did that creature just... sit? The response came from Lieutenant Junho Nam, who was monitoring the situation from a safe distance with high-powered scopes. "Confirmed, sir. The hostile has..." It's sitting like a trained animal. Park looked around at his staff, all of whom were staring at their instruments in shock. How is that possible? Nobody had an answer. In the agricultural sector, Somi took a small step forward. The Warbeast's eyes tracked her movement, but it didn't rise from its sitting position. Its massive head tilted slightly, watching her with something that might have been curiosity. "That's it," she said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle authority she'd used with frightened animals back home. "You're not a monster. You're just lost and scared." The creature made a sound deep in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whine. The neural implants along its skull still pulsed, but the rhythm had changed. Instead of the rapid, aggressive flashing that had accompanied its rampage, the lights now pulsed slowly, almost peacefully. Somi reached out with one small hand, moving slowly and deliberately. The survivors behind her gasped, certain she was about to be torn apart. But the Warbeast didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of aggression. Her palm touched the creature's scarred snout, and for the first time since its creation in some illegal laboratory on a forgotten world, the Warbeast felt something other than rage and pain. The touch was gentle, warm, completely without threat or demand. "Good boy," Somi whispered, and something extraordinary happened. The burning red glow in the creature's eyes began to fade, replaced by something else, something that looked almost like relief. The constant tension in its massive frame relaxed slightly, and the psychic waves of terror that had been radiating from it diminished to barely a whisper. For the first time since its creation, the Warbeast's eyes showed something other than artificial rage and programmed aggression. They showed hope, fragile and uncertain, but unmistakably real, across the galaxy. This moment would be remembered as the turning point. Not the moment when humanity defeated the monster through superior firepower or advanced technology, but the moment when a child saw past the horror to find the frightened creature beneath in her small hand. Resting against the beast's scarred face, she held not just the creature's future, but the future of every enhanced predator that had been twisted into something it was never meant to be. She had proven that understanding could triumph over fear, that compassion could overcome programming, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply refuse to be afraid. The Warbeast that had terrorized Nexus 7 was still there, but it was no longer alone in its rage. For the first time in its existence, it had found something it had never known it was looking for, a pack leader who saw it not as a weapon, but as a living being deserving of kindness. The hunt was over. Healing could begin. The first night, after the Warbeast sat down, nobody slept. Somi curled up against the creature's massive side, using its warm hide as a blanket while her father and the other survivors watched in amazement from inside the greenhouse. The beast which Somi had started calling Buddy remained perfectly still, as if afraid that any movement might break the fragile trust between them. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Hyun Kong as he watched his daughter sleep peacefully next to the galaxy's most feared predator. 3 days ago, that thing was tearing apart military installations. But as the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. The neural implants along Buddy's skull, which had pulsed with aggressive blue light during his rampage, began to dim. Without the constant stimulation of fear and violence, the artificial conditioning started to weaken. By morning, Somi was teaching Buddy simple commands. The massive creature, who had once responded only to programmed aggression, now tilted his head when she spoke and even attempted what might have been a tail wag when she praised him. "Look, Dad," Somi called out excitedly as she held up a piece of emergency ration. "He knows how to be gentle." The Warbeast's enormous mouth opened, revealing teeth the size of daggers. But when he took the food from her tiny hand, he was careful not to even graze her skin. His movements were precise, controlled nothing like the savage beast that had terrorized the colony just days before. Word of the miracle spread quickly through the emergency communication networks. Military commanders who had been planning orbital bombardments to contain the threat suddenly found themselves dealing with something unprecedented. Pacified WARBAST. On the third day, the sky filled with ships. Galactic security had arrived in force, their massive battle cruisers blocking out the sun as they took positions around the colony. At their head was the flagship Righteous Fury, commanded by Admiral Kung Jun-shin, a veteran of the Outer Rim. Wars who had seen more than his share of monsters. The Admiral's shuttle touched down in the agricultural sector with a full platoon of heavily armed Marines. They approached the greenhouse with weapons ready, expecting to find either a massacre or the remains of whatever poor souls had been trapped with the beast instead. They found Somi sitting cross-legged next to Buddy, both of them sharing her morning rations. The Warbeast looked up as the soldiers approached, but made no aggressive moves. If anything, he seemed curious about these new arrivals. "Stand down, child," Admiral Shin ordered, his plasma rifle trained on the creature's head. His weathered face was grim with determination. "Step away from that thing immediately." "His name is Buddy," Somi said firmly, not moving from her position. She placed one small hand on the creature's foreleg, and the massive beast leaned slightly into her touch. "And he's not dangerous anymore. He just needed someone to understand him." The Admiral's finger tightened on his weapon's trigger. "That thing has killed hundreds of beings across 12 systems. My orders are to terminate it with extreme prejudice." "But look at him," Somi insisted. "Really look." For the first time, Admiral Shin did more than assess the creature as a threat. Buddy's posture was relaxed, almost protective as he sat beside the small girl. The burning red eyes that had terrorized entire star systems now held an intelligence that seemed almost peaceful. "It's a trick," one of the Marines muttered. "These things are designed to be deceptive." But Dr. Hoon Kong stepped forward from the greenhouse, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Admiral, my daughter has proven something incredible here. These creatures can be rehabilitated. Think of what we could learn, what we could accomplish if we studied this instead of simply destroying it." The standoff stretched for hours. More ships arrived, news, crews, scientific vessels, and representatives from a dozen different worlds. The story was spreading across the galaxy at light speed. A human child had done what entire military fleets could not. Entameable. As the day wore on, something unexpected happened. Buddy began to show protective instincts toward Somi. When the Marine's weapons were pointed too directly at her, the creature would shift position to shield her. When she seemed tired, he would lower his massive head so she could rest against it. "He's bonding with her," observed Dr. Mira Ozan, a xenobiologist who had arrived on one of the research ships. "This goes against everything we know about enhanced predators." Admiral Shin found himself in an impossible position. His orders were clear to terminate the threat, but as he watched the interaction between child and beast, he began to see something that challenged everything he thought he knew about these creatures. The turning point came when Somi fell asleep against Buddy's side. The massive creature carefully adjusted his position to make her more comfortable, then settled into what was clearly a protective watch. His enhanced senses remained alert for any danger, but his attention was focused entirely on keeping the small humans safe. "Perhaps," Admiral Shin said slowly, lowering his weapon, "it's time we reconsidered our approach to these enhanced creatures." The decision to spare Buddy sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. For the first time in decades, an alternative to extermination was being seriously considered. Dr. Hang Kong was appointed to head a new research initiative, studying the rehabilitation potential of enhanced predators. Years passed, and the Nexus 7 incident became legend. Somi and Buddy traveled the galaxy as ambassadors for the Enhanced Creature Rehabilitation Program. They visited worlds where similar creatures had been captured, demonstrating that understanding could triumph over fear. On the agricultural world of Kepler 44b, they rehabilitated a pack of modified dire wolves that had been terrorizing settlements. On the mining station at Proxima Centauri, they calmed a berserker-enhanced Titan bear that had gone rogue, each success built on the last, proving that, beneath the artificial rage and programmed aggression, these creatures retained their capacity for loyalty, intelligence, and even love. Somi grew up to become the galaxy's leading expert on enhanced creature psychology. Buddy remained her constant companion, a gentle giant who had become a symbol of hope across the stars. Together, they proved that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in inspiring fear, but in offering understanding, wherever they went, beings of all species would gather to hear their story, the tale of the little girl who spoke one word and changed everything. The word that proved that even the most dangerous monsters could be reached with patience, courage, and compassion. The word that turned a weapon back into a living being. The word that shook the stars. The end.